ground sea transportation is a huge and super important part of the travel industry, and it's currently being overlooked. And it's something that everybody needs. Everybody's going to use it at some point of their travels, and everybody's going to have a hard time booking it unless the industry goes online. So it's a huge opportunity, and it's really kind of the last opportunity to digitize the industry in travel today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special spotlight episode of Travel Trends. This is your host, Dan Christian, and today I'm joined by Noam Toister, who is the CEO and co-founder of Travelier, a company that has been powering a huge part of the global travel industry that often gets overlooked, and that is the ground and sea transportation. Often all the attention goes to flights, but as Noam highlights in this episode, there's actually more daily departures by sea than there is by land, and there's a whole lot more complexity given the fact that the size and shape of those ships varies much more significantly than planes. We also look at this whole idea of connected travel in 2026 beyond air and what happens in between the buses, the ferries, and the trains, and how they really are the backbone of how travelers are moving through regions, connecting with destinations, and ultimately experiencing places much more deeply. That's actually one of the big themes I wanted to pick up in this discussion, which is this concept of secondary destinations. And I think that's one of the biggest trends in travel today and what travelers are looking for. They're looking at dupe destinations, places that are not as over touristed and places that offer additional value and they're less explored. A perfect example of this is Thailand. I've been to Thailand multiple times and over the course of many years have traveled through Koh Phangan and Koh Samui and Koh Tao. What I didn't realize, and that Noam points out to me today, is they actually offer a direct from Bangkok with a flight and a ferry to get direct to Koh Tao, which would have been a much more difficult destination to get to. And it's also one of those destinations that more and more people then have access to explore. We talk about the impact this has on local economies and demand for new destinations, which I think is one of the most exciting aspects of what they've been building. The other part, of course, is this is a marketplace. So we talk about business side and then we break down the B2C and B2B components and how whether it's backpackers or families looking to take these types of trips or them working with OTAs, tour operators to make sure that this product and inventory with all the real-time data is available to them without actually having to build it themselves. So if you're interested in the future of travel, which I think is most of our listeners to our podcast, but specifically how smarter travel infrastructure and connectivity will shape where and how people travel, then this is a conversation you definitely don't want to miss. Noam, welcome to Travel Trends. It's great to have you back with us.
Great to be here, Dan. Great to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Tell everyone where you are today and where your headquarters is.
I'm in Tel Aviv. One of our headquarters is in Tel Aviv, Bangkok, Buenos Aires, and Sao Paulo, and Split in Croatia.
Amazing. Well, it's truly a global company. Obviously, we had the privilege to meet again at the Focusrite conference in San Diego. So people on our podcast have heard your voice before. Everyone got a good sense from that introduction there about the company and your background. But I'd love for our audience to hear it in your words as we feature Travelier and what you have built, which is incredibly impressive with your two co-founders. But I would love to hear from your perspective. Tell everyone a little bit of the backstory on this company and what you guys do, because you have, this is the part that amazed me, you have so many brands underneath the parent company and you've got such a unique business. And I think one of the things that stood out to me, which is like the last undigitized sector in travel and the fact that you power like ground and sea transportation. Like when I met you and got to know more about your business, it became more and more fascinating. So tell us how you would describe Travelier and what you guys do.
Great. So Travelier is the ground and sea transportation booking platform. So basically, we're a platform to digitize ground and sea transportation. So buses, ferries, rail, anything that's intercity transportation, private car with driver is traditionally services that people still book in most of the world offline. They people book on ferry piers, bus terminals, agents on the street. Super fragmented industry with tens of thousands of small, medium businesses around the world that run buses and different vehicles around the world. And most of that industry is still booked offline, and we digitize that industry. So we're basically booking.com for ground and sea transportation for buses, ferries, rail on the one hand. On the other side, we provide different services for bus and ferry operators. First of all, we provide demand, but also we provide them with software and other services that they need to run their business and get customers online.
Well, what I find fascinating is that, this is a $200 billion industry or somewhere in that realm as I was doing my research and preparing for our conversation today. And one of the things that any great startup, there's an addressable market. And so clearly you're a serial entrepreneur even before creating this company. But, this is now nearly 10 years in. But any great startup has an interesting origin story about trying to figure out what the problem is they're trying to solve. Tell everyone about that, about your honeymoon, because I found that really interesting when we spoke directly and just knowing a bit about your background. But tell everyone how you realized that there was an issue here and that ultimately how you set out to solve it.
Yeah, so I was traveling. It was when I was traveling, it was already 10 years ago now. So I was, still young, happy, no kids, brown hair, and and still very free. And I was traveling in the Philippines. I was trying to get to a very famous tourist destination north of Manila, called Banaue, and it's a kind of World Heritage site, rice terraces, beautiful rice terraces, and together you need to book a bus ticket at the bus terminal because that's the only place you can book it. The bus terminal is quite far away from the center of the city. You get there, there are only buses for the next day because it's always fully booked. And then you come back the next day, you buy the ticket, you come back the next day, and the buses are filled with tourists and locals that have done the same thing. And that's kind of weird. That was kind of weird for me at that point because this is 2016. Hotels are already booked online completely. The flights, obviously, but still buses are not online. And I came back to Israel. Like I said, I had a previous startup that was just shutting down at that point, and I built a very simple website that sold tickets from Manila to different destinations. And I had a Filipino travel agent that used to go to the bus station once a day, buy the bus ticket, the physical bus tickets that I had booked the same day, and take a photo of those and send them to the customers by email. And the customers would come to the bus station, show the ticket on the phone, and since the number matched or the name matched, then they would just board the bus and it was fine. And pretty soon I kind of realized that that thing worked, even though it was like a super simple and non-reliable website. Duplicated it in a couple of other destinations which I knew are popular, and I realized it's a huge industry and it's a huge opportunity with a digital gap. And that's how we founded Travelier initially, which was called back then Bookaway. Um, and and we raised the pre-seed round into late 2017. Started a hub in Bangkok. Started to kind of visit different bus companies and transportation operators around Southeast Asia, and then expanded to Latin America. And I think the rest is history.
Well, the part that's really fascinating for me is that Bookaway, obviously, as you mentioned, was the initial brand, and obviously you still have it's evolved since then. Like, I mean, the fact you've created what became like the fastest growing ground transportation marketplace. You've got nearly 2,000 cities. You're in like over 100 countries, and that's how the origin of the business started. But you have a whole series of brands underneath that: 12 Go, Platforma 10. Tell us a little bit about and traveling.com. And obviously, if people, as I mentioned at the beginning, that travelier.com, if you want to follow along our conversation. But tell us about the brands under the portfolio now and how it evolved from Bookaway to Travelier and all the brands underneath the parent company.
Yeah, so we had an interesting story because we were founded as Bookaway, and we had a great growth in the early years, and then COVID hit early 2020, and the entire industry was basically down to zero pretty quickly. And we initially, tried to kind of figure out what we want to do, and we thought that this is going to be a 6 months, 9 months problem, and then it'll go away. But it didn't. And at some point, we looked at the market and what's going on. And we thought we need to do something. And what we ended up doing is that we ended up acquiring four of our competitors during COVID because we looked at the market. We had a firm belief that travel is going to come back. We just weren't sure if it's going to take a year, 2 years, or even more. And we also understood that this is a great opportunity for us to some degree. And we ended up acquiring a couple of competitors and rolling it up into Bookaway, changing the name to Travelier because we at that point we became a company that had several brands, so we wanted to put Travelier as kind of the brand that consolidates everything. And we ended up acquiring these companies, merging them into what was at Bookaway, which is now Travelier, and ended up growing enormously post COVID, and we continue to grow at a very fast pace since then.
Well, and one of the things I'm keen to know a bit more about in our chat today is the team, because you and I have gotten to know each other quite well, and obviously it's always great to see you at the industry conferences. So you are, very active, and even as I was preparing for our chat, I was reading some of the latest interviews you've done and understanding the company even more deeply than I do and the trajectory you're on. But tell us a little bit about the team, because you have two co-founders, and also I'd love for you to share a bit more about where the team has gotten to today, like given all the offices and the size of the team. But tell us a little bit about the founding team and their roles.
So both co-founders actually come from Hotel Beds, if you know the company. So they were both VPs at a company that Hotel Beds acquired a few years back, and they were VP product and VP marketing. And when Hotel Beds acquired their company, they decided that they don't want the corporate life, and they thought of building a new startup, and they had this original idea of a travel planning app. and and they thought it's a killer, and they went to one of our investors and they told him the story, and the investor said, "Look, I mean, I've seen a million of that, so I'm not going to invest, but I do have a company that I'm investing. I'm invested at, and I think you guys should meet the founder." And I met them, and we were at an immediate click, and they joined me as a founding team early on, and then the rest is history. And one of my co-founder originally was the product. Now he manages all the different brands, kind of manages the COO at the COO level. The other co-founder led the Bookaway brand. Now he's leading the supply operations around the world. That's the founding team today, and we're now 620 people, I think, in 5 different hubs around the world. We had enormous growth during 2021. Obviously, when we did the M&As, we grew, I think, from about 50 people to 250 people in a very short time. And since then, we continued to kind of scale with the business growth.
It's fascinating, and that's why I wanted to highlight that, is because one of my favorite TED Talks is Bill Gross's The Single Biggest Reason Why Startups Succeed. And the factors that many of our listeners may be familiar with, obviously timing is one factor, the team, the funding, and then the execution. And the reality is that the single biggest reason is timing. And so but you have to have all the other factors in place as well. You have to have a strong founding team. You have to have investors that back you. And you guys have had all of those elements, which is why here you are, nearly 10 years in, and you're a global success story that many people, including a lot of our listeners, have never heard of yet.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I would add that one of the main factors that have like huge correlation with success is speed of execution and speed of decision making, which I think is something we're pretty good at. We've also were fortunate enough, and I didn't mention it before, the fact that we were able to execute 4 different acquisitions during COVID is because we had investors that were bullish and were like really strong and supportive investors that looked at the business and said, you know what, we're doubling down because we believe there's an opportunity.
Well, and let's talk about that market then, because this is also the part that I find really interesting, is that you set out to solve a problem based on your perspective, your experience on your honeymoon. And obviously, as you said, you were young, little kids, you had lots of energy, you still do, but nevertheless, that is a time in your life when that's a perfect time for a startup, for anybody listening to this, having had twins and then going through that journey. And so one of the things, though, that I wanted to dive into is the market itself, because flights get so much attention. Everyone always talks about flights, and obviously there's startups like Hopper and Skyscanner and but interestingly, like buses, ferries, trains do not get as much of the spotlight. But you highlighted as well that clearly there was competition. You acquired 4 of your competitors during COVID, like an incredibly savvy time to be active, knowing travel is going to come back. A lot of our listeners are investors. We've got a lot of private equity and VCs that listen to our podcast because they're trying to figure out where travel's going and where they should look to acquire businesses. And I always find that fascinating when they reach out to me with questions because they hear fascinating insights from executives and founders like yourself, where they all of a sudden understand there's a new market opportunity. But for you, not only do you have to realize there is an opportunity, you have to execute against it, which is exactly what I'm trying to get to here with this question, which is like, how do you seize that opportunity? And then that whole concept of like what got you there won't keep you there. You need to continue to innovate. But tell us a bit more about how you stitch all this together. So when you realized there was the opportunity for ground transport and specifically sea transport as well, which I would say is probably even the more unique part of your offering, how does that work from a technology point of view, working with partners? How did you solve for that and then integrate it into the traveler journey?
So first of all, there's one point which you mentioned, which is super significant. And I don't think a lot of people realize it, and that there are in magnitude more departures of of buses, ferries, trains, and so on than there are departures of flights globally, right? So if you think about like number of people that actually travel, then ground sea transportation is significantly bigger than flights around the world. But still, it's not digitized. Now, if you go in and again, we work in Asia and Latin America. The experience would vary a little bit if you go to Western Europe. North America is much more digitized, obviously. But those are different markets. But if you go to most of the markets in the world, if you try to book ground and sea transportation, there's 2 things you will notice. One is you don't know anything, so you don't know when the bus or the ferry or whatever it is actually leave. That like it's not in list. You're gonna have to go to different websites, blogs, and kind of figure it out. You don't know how much it costs. If you do find a price, it's probably from 5 years ago. Um, and you definitely don't know what's the experience like in most places because a bus in Argentina is a great luxury experience and you can sleep in it, and a bus in Bolivia right across the border could be completely different, and that one is completely different than a bus in Thailand, and 2 companies within Brazil would have different experience, even though both of them would call it an executive bus, right? Because there is no standard in the market. It's not like a 737 is a 737. And the content is not out there. So not unlike hotels where you see the images and you see the reviews and what everybody said about the hotel, that rarely exists in ground and sea transportation. So you're going to have a hard time booking that. The reason behind that is fairly kind of structural. And we can go into why that's the situation. But if you look at the travel industry, there's very few kind of inventory management systems. So if you think about the hotel world, then property management systems work. If you think about flights, you have seating management and so on. Then you have aggregators, big companies, Amadeus, Hotelbeds, and so on. They actually aggregate all the hundreds of thousands of operators or businesses and serve them in single API. In ground sea transportation, that infrastructure has not evolved. There's several inventory management systems, usually not really scalable technology. Aggregation, there's basically nothing besides us and some competitors that we're not going to talk about, and or maybe we can talk about them. Yeah, and that's it, right? So I hope that answered the question.
No, very much so. And I'm glad you actually went into detail on that because I'm genuinely interested, which obviously part of the reason I asked the question, but I'm sure our listeners are too, because minds are being open to one of the things you just shared right there, which is the number of departures for sea transportation is greater than air. And what you also described was a very complex problem to solve that we did an aviation series at the end of season 6. And we talked about the fact that, many of the low cost carriers, they have the same jet units in the 737, like this, or the MAX, or there's most of the low cost carriers have the same plane because they can sub them in. And so there's consistency in the delivery and the experience for guests, but you have so much more complexity to the market that you operate in. The other part that I also found really interesting is the whole marketplace, the B2B and B2C side. So I'm very keen for our listeners to also understand how you tie those two together, because you, as you just highlighted, you're working in all these other global markets, and then you're trying to take the offering for buses and ferries and trains, and then try and figure out how you take that supplier side inventory and make it accessible for travelers to book. So given that you guys operate on both sides, B2B and B2C, can you give us kind of a bit of an overview of how those two sides differ, and how you make sure they complement each other?
Right. So I think that most of the marketplaces have a similar flywheel or dynamics, which goes through getting the supply, then kind of optimizing the offering, getting the customers, having a really great customer experience, and then having the customers come back, which in turn kind of creates a value for the supply side again, right? In our marketplace, what we realized and we felt that the big kind of the starting point, or the big pain point, is actually the supply side, because the supply side wasn't online, right? So if you started a new marketplace today, like Hopper, which is a great company, right? But flights, they had kind of the access point to the flight inventory. They just had a different experience around it. When you start ground and sea transportation company, you actually need to figure out how you sell the inventory, how you bring the inventory online. And our initial I guess strategy and the way we operated in the first years was that, if you build it, they will come. Like we bring it online, and people look for it, and it sells, and it kind of worked, and it still works to some degree. Although now we focus on more on both sides of, like, we focus more on the customer experience as well, and on the supplier experience. Now, because we see ourselves as a kind of system of record for the operators, we kind of an infrastructure for them. So we start by actually bringing them online in various ways, and we can talk about it, because they don't always have the technical infrastructure to actually connect with us. So we bring them online. We provide them with the technical infrastructure to go online if they need it, if they want it. We provide them with other services like help with financing sometimes, and something like that. Sometimes we would, for example, look at a certain region, and we'd see that we have demand for a certain route. So people are going from A to B, and then they go from B to C. But a lot of people are looking, how can I get directly from A to C? But that doesn't exist. So we would go to a ground and sea operator and tell them, can you open a bus route for us? Because we have demands for that. And sometimes we actually go out and fund the bus, the actual bus, to say, hey, we're going to buy the seats in advance if you can sell us if you can open the service. So we provide them with demand, we provide them with software, and we provide them with other kind of financial capabilities. And that in turn creates a situation where we provide real value for the supply side, while actually enabling the seamless booking experience for the customer.
Well, and that's where I'm keen to go a little deeper on the B2B side in particular, because partly given my background with trying to connect supply with the demand, but like the challenge that still exists in the travel industry with so many experiences not being digitized. I mean, even my role at Lonely Planet over 15 years ago was the idea of trying to make Lonely Planet reviewed and recommended accommodation bookable online, which is largely what Booking.com did. And that's a massive industry in itself. And I see that you guys are, I would say, still in relative infancy in terms of the potential, given how much of this product is offline. So I wanted to talk about the supplier side, because I'm sure there might be suppliers listening to this, Noam, that might go, wait a second, we're not working with these guys. I'm like, how do we get on this platform? How do we sell through them? So when you, on the B2B side, how do suppliers, or even for that matter, distribution channels, work with you guys?
Right. So first of all, yeah, you mentioned something which is accurate, we are very far from reaching kind of the maturity of the market. We still grow at an average pace of now it's about 8 or 9 operators every day. So it's a huge kind of growth, and we still have operators. Some of them we reach out to actively if we're new in the market, but a lot of them already reach out to us because they know us. Usually, when we are active in a certain market, they can either reach out through the website and just the support would connect them with the supply teams, the business development teams, or they would kind of hear from us from the market, and one operator would recommend us to the other operator, and that's how we really expand.
And then let's talk about the consumer side as well, because I'm sure obviously people will be checking out the website to learn more about like becoming a partner or like how best to integrate into, but from a consumer side, because all of a sudden now they have the opportunity. And this is what always excites me is like once it's available to be booked. I mean, just look at Uber is probably the most relevant example today of creating a market that didn't exist before. Obviously, everyone knows the Airbnb story, but like even the Uber, like to take something that you could now all of a sudden package and sell and monetize and continue to adapt and scale. So like from a consumer point of view, all of a sudden they're going to have access to ferries or bus schedules that they wouldn't otherwise. So for me as a traveler, that excites me a great deal, especially when I was a backpacker. But even if I'm traveling with my family or like, people looking for lower cost transport as well, like looking for alternatives to flights where it might be less expensive to travel by ground transport. So tell us a little bit about the consumer side. How are consumers working with, like, are they booking direct? Are they booking direct through your platforms? Are they booking through partners? How does the consumer side work?
First of all, it's important to mention that it, I mean, it may be a lot of people think about this as a kind of backpacker product, and it really isn't, because if you look at the numbers in terms of distribution of tourists, we don't have like we have the age distribution quite equal. With no tendency towards younger travelers or backpackers or solo travelers actually, or even more. We have a lot of families traveling in using our services, and the point is that if you want to get around, if you want to get away from the main hubs, if you are visiting a country and you want to visit more than the main city, um, you have to get ground transportation. Like in most cases, you won't have a flight that would get to that destination. And it turns out that people in a lot of these countries take 4 to 5 different journeys along their vacation or visit. And so it doesn't matter if you're a family with kids or you're a backpacker, you actually need to get that ferry if you want to get to the island. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. And actually, if you think about it, when you have kids, now I said I have twins, I'm sure that the last thing that you want to do is stand at a pier and wonder when the ferry is coming. Um, with the twins, you want to book it in advance and make sure that you have the place on the ferry when it arrives. So that's like everybody needs ground and sea transportation. That's the first thing, and they find us today mostly through online channels, Google, to kind of be specific, I guess. And people search usually, and how do I get from this place to this place, and they find us online. If they look for us in social media, they would Twitter, Instagram. A lot of people actually post on my journey from Bangkok to Chiang Mai and how the train looks and so on. And a lot of times they would mention that they booked this that on Want to Go or Bookaway or something like that. So people find us like this. We also have a distribution channel, which is a B2B distribution channel. So we have an API that other travel brands can connect to and then sell it as an ancillary, as an upsell to the services that are already selling. So people find us on various distinct places.
And no, the one thing that when you said that, I've been in that exact situation in Greece with my wife and the two kids, having spent like the day in Santorini and waiting to go back to the island we were staying on, and the ferry, we were in the wrong line. And we didn't realize it because the technology wasn't there. And this is still in recent times. This is only a few years ago. And the ferry left, and then we were told that was our ferry. And then we ended up having to take another ferry that stopped at multiple islands. It took us like 6 hours to get back. Everyone was miserable. And it was one of those days where I'm just like,
yeah, the kids are crying and
exactly.
Yeah,
So
right. And you just
I have been there. Like that's why I like this in many ways. Like this is like there has to be a technology to solve for this. How can I order an Uber but I can't decide of 3 ferries which is the one to get on? Like it seems so antiquated.
Yeah. And getting back to your point about Uber, the point is, and this is something we firmly believe, is that when you enable easy access and easy and seamless kind of journey to different places, you actually open up the market and you enable people to visit new exciting destinations. because one of the reasons that you would go to, let's say, so you mentioned Santorini, we're from like there's like several, I don't know, hundreds of islands in Greece. There's Naxos and Zakynthos and all that, and you don't go to these islands because they don't have an airport. Um, and you could go there if it was easy to get there. And these are amazing islands. They're called second tier destinations, not because they're second, but just because they're not like the main place that people get to. But a lot of times they happen to have a much nicer experience, less dense. Um, one like we have a few examples that I can mention of places that have grown in the last couple of years, and I think that it is enabled by better transportation, and that's part of the things that we're really proud of and really focusing to do in Travelier, which is enabling kind of access to great, amazing places in the world that otherwise would be hard to reach.
So this to me is probably the most exciting aspect of what you guys offer and where the market is headed, because we genuinely have an issue of over tourism in certain key cities, and people are starting to distribute the time of the year they're traveling places. That's one option, that people are traveling more in the shoulder seasons. But overwhelmingly, we're seeing travelers decide on alternate destinations. So there's all these kind of like lookalike destinations, or that and that's also taking off now. It's like so it starts with countries where all of a sudden they were going to Croatia and now they're going to Albania, but they're going from they still want to see Paris, but they actually are making alternative itineraries to take them to what people would describe as hidden gems, but even they become kind of well-worn path after a while. And I always think back to the Lonely Planet, off the beaten path. But the reality is, most of those destinations, as soon as they're in a Lonely Planet guide, they become the beaten path. That's the reality. It's like everyone finds out about them, and next thing you know, they're flooded and they're overwhelmed. And it's one of the things that excites me a great deal after having been at the ATTA conference in Chile last year. It took 4 flights and 2 buses to get there, and it took a little more than 2 days to get to this remote region of Patagonia that we were traveling to, and it was absolutely worth it. Like it was, and once we got there,
where was it?
Well, so the conference was in Puerto Natales, but we were actually in the Isen region beforehand doing a cycling trip, and so I flew from Toronto to Bogota to Santiago, and then there's 2 flights to get actually down to Porto Arenas, and then we had to take a bus but once we got there, there's nobody around. It's stunning, pristine beauty, and it's like, and people are saying we want to keep it this way. We want to make it more challenging to get to, because this is not. And so for me, being able to unlock those like secondary destinations is the most exciting opportunity in travel today. So tell us a little bit more about those emerging destinations and how you guys are being able to create that connectivity.
Yeah, so interesting anecdote. I actually spent 5 days in Porto Natales, but I actually never left my room. I had 40 degrees fever the whole time.
Oh no!
And
Oh, no.
all my friends had a great time, and they did. I think they did there's a track there. There's a famous walking track there, like a hiking trail there. Really famous. Can't remember the name. And
it's in Puerto Natales is Torres del Paine, which is one of the
Torres del
beautiful.
Paine.
Yeah, that's like extraordinary. We spent an evening there, and a lot of people after the conference went back and spent a couple of days hiking there. And you can do horseback riding. It's extraordinarily beautiful. But yeah, tell us how you are unlocking those second tier destinations with your technology and some examples.
Yeah. So first of all, it's just enabling to actually book these services, the service to these destinations easily online, unlocks that destination, and allows people to actually get there easily. Now, once you start to actually have tourists in a certain region, and the infrastructure starts to improve, we actually see that the number of operators that actually are working in that region actually usually grows. And we start to get even better services, nicer buses, and more companies doing that route. A lot of times we do that actively because we go to the operators and we tell them, look, we think there's demand for that region. Let's kind of open a route there, and we're willing to kind of pre-buy some inventory to make sure that it's worth it for you guys to open it up. I think that there's a few interesting destinations. If you think about it, I think Ninh Binh in Vietnam is like becoming super popular. When like I don't think anybody heard about it 5, 10 years ago, maybe. Amazing place. If you think about Thailand, I don't think that one is not related to us at all, but Koh Tao is one of the most like popular, I think, growing destinations that we have. When you think about it, Koh Samui is actually the highlighted kind of destination with the White Lotus and everything being filmed there and that. But Koh Tao is basically the same, right? But just a little bit further away and less crowded. And that's a really, really nice growing destination. Um, we basically once our perception is once you allow the easy booking experience, the seamless experience to actually get there, and really traveling around the country is a huge pain. And once you make it um, a fun and easy experience, you unlock a lot of new destinations, and you distribute tourism in a healthier way across regions.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect example because when we first were backpacking, traveling around Southeast Asia, and we went to Koh Samui, Koh Phangan, and Koh Tao, and obviously the taking a ferry between those islands. Then at the time, this is our first trip there was 20 years ago, and it was Koh Tao was incredibly remote, and it was like known for diving. And the remoteness was its appeal. And, today, obviously, Thailand has become such an international tourist destination for so many people around the world that it's really developed. Obviously, Koh Samui is like fully developed, almost like Hawaii in many ways. And there's people that love those kind of resorts, and that's why they'll still continue to go to a place like Koh Samui. And it is a beautiful island. But for those travelers that want something more remote, finding these ways to get there, and this was the part for me that like there was a charm and appeal to the unpredictability of trying to find your way around. But that's only in the case if you have you're taking 3 months or 6 months, you're on a gap year trip. And so what I like about the utilization of technology is that someone who only has a week or 10 days can still be able to figure out how to get to Koh Tao and be able to make their bookings, as opposed to having a situation where they might miss a day and they don't have that day to spare.
And one of the ways, by the way, that we find that actually increases demand for certain destinations is that the connected trips. So we stitch one of the things that we're able to do because we serve multimodal, like a lot of forms of transportation. We're able to stitch together different types of transportation. So while we're ground, like we call ourselves a non-air travel company, we do have flights on the platform because we're connected to different flights, and we're able to actually sell to you a bundle of a flight and a ferry. So if you want to get to Koh Tao, you can book like Bangkok directly to Koh Tao with us, and you get the flight and you get the ferry, and you get a connection in one ticket. And that's something that really kind of solves us through a lot of problems. And so we're able to connect flights with different modes of transportation. We're able to connect different modes of transportation like buses and a ferry. And we're able to connect just the different buses to that A to B and B to C, just stitching together A to C. And that solves for a lot of kind of figuring out and unknowns and what's going to happen if I get there and there's no bus.
Exactly. Yeah. So tell us, I'd love to hear a few more examples of this because many travel advisors listen to our podcast as well. They're trying to make recommendations for their clients as to places they can go, but they want to rely on the fact that they're going to have a great experience. They're not going to have issues getting there. So they need to have a trusted supplier they can work with. So tell us, what are some other standards? We've talked about Chile. We've talked a little bit about Greece. We've just talked about Thailand. What are some of the other global destinations that you're seeing connectivity open up new travel opportunities?
So I think Indonesia, we see a lot of growth. We see there's a lot of different islands, different opportunities in there. I think Morocco, surprisingly, is an interesting market that's is growing and getting a lot of kind of popularity. Costa Rica, as an example, really becoming very popular with U.S. tourists. Japan is growing enormously, but that's not a new kind of that's not a new story. But the amount of like Western tourists that are getting to Japan and finding it easier to kind of explore the different destinations within Japan is growing.
Well, it's interesting when you mention Japan because one of the things that is often highlighted, and Shannon Stoll does a great job of this when he's talking about how travelers, 90% of travelers will only travel within 100 miles of the destination they're arriving in. And this is one of the challenges with modern day tourism, and especially with a country like Japan, is actually opening up access to more remote areas of the country that are beautiful, but part of the reason they're inaccessible, or you can't get there in a timely manner, despite the fact there are bullet trains across the country. But there are places that are just not as accessible. And so for me, this opportunity really excites me as far as new and emerging destinations. But the other thing I want to talk about is what is, you mentioned about competitors and acknowledging obviously you do have competitors today. You also mentioned something that really stood out to me, which is about the speed of execution. And so when I have conversations with successful startup entrepreneurs like yourself, and I think back to the conversation I had with Jake Peters, who's the co-founder at Fora. And one of the things that he was very confident, and many of our listeners heard this in our Spotlight episode, is like he was very keen to be able to share the roadmap, what they're working on. He was not concerned about competition in the same way because he knows this team is going to be focusing on delivering. It's not about trying to conceal what some of their plans are. It's like, this is the direction we're headed. Here's the product we're going to incorporate. Here's the markets we're going into. And it's just like, and I feel like there's a lot of similarities between their success trajectory and yours. And also just given like the wisdom and experience that you have from previous and then now running this company for 10 years. And so one of the things I'm always keen to understand about company success stories, let alone startup success stories, is what differentiates them, what makes them truly unique. So one of the questions I was very keen to ask you from a technology point of view with partners, why would they choose to work with you versus building it themselves? I know part of the answer to that myself, having been on the other side of the table, which is often, technology is not the expertise of travel companies. They struggle to build platforms and technology. But what would be, from a partner point of view, the competitive advantages for Travelier and the brands? Like, what are some of the compelling reasons that clearly you guys are continuing to see the growth you are?
So first of all, I think that it's not as easy as it sounds building it yourself, because the basic building blocks are not there for ground and sea transportation. Because what we ended up building and are still continuing to work through is the entire infrastructure. So a lot of times we go to the market and an operator wouldn't have a booking system, right? So we actually are a SaaS booking system that we provide them, and we become their entire system of record for online and offline bookings. So we've done that. So operators use us a lot of times. We have a point of sale. Also, like if you go the offline, sometimes you're using our systems. So we've done that. Now, then there is the aggregation block. Now, serving millions of requests of different travel providers and websites and so on is a system that needs to be scalable and needs to return answers in a fast pace, and needs to return accurate answers, right? So you actually want to know that the bus actually is first of all available, that the price is correct, and so on. And that infrastructure has been built through dozens of years with companies like Amadeus and Sabre and so on. And that's not an easy infrastructure to build. And we're building that for transportation today. And the experience, and still in flights, by the way, I'm sure that sometimes you would look at a kayak or something, you click on the flight, and then you go to the checkout and it tells you, sorry, we actually don't have that flight, right? That still happens in flights. In transportation, the problem is much bigger because the infrastructure is not there. Now, the infrastructure itself is very different, because if you think about flights, if you go from New York to London, you're flying from JFK and landing in Heathrow. It doesn't matter if it's Delta or United. They're going from A to B. That's it. If you are in buses, then the bus could leave from multiple locations within the city. It could leave from Union Station, from Chinatown, from just a random place in the city, and it can land in various places, and it actually stops in the middle. So you have multiple legs in the middle that people go on and off, and it changes the availability and the and sometimes the pricing as well. So So that's a whole infrastructure that is a lot of heavy lifting to build, and the big players could probably build it, but it'll be simpler for them to buy one of us or a competitor if they want to go into the market. Um, and that's why we're not really worried about that. Like we know that today we are the infrastructure layer for a lot of the ground and sea transportation markets in the world.
Really fascinating. And I guess that's, from then a consumer point of view, what would be, because thinking purely as a consumer myself and an avid traveler, one thing is if you offer something I can't get elsewhere, obviously that's a reason to travel with you, full stop. So, that example you shared about Thailand is a perfect example. I didn't even know that existed. And so knowing that it does on a future trip, I would have, because we took our kids back and we took them to Koh Samui, and we actually left after a week. We planned to spend 2 weeks. We left after a week just because it was not what we remembered. It was very crowded, and we were just like, this is not. We should have made alternate plans, and we did. And we ended up going to Sri Lanka for a week, and instead on our trip, we literally reworked our trip and went to Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka was incredible. And I was like, we could have. And I'm so glad that we went and experienced Sri Lanka, because it offered all the things that we remembered from Thailand, 15 years before. So from a consumer point of view, how important are the brand proposition that you have? Like how relevant is it for consumers to know your brands? Is it mainly kind of the B2B angle, or which of your brands, especially traveling.com, are the ones that consumers should know about? And what is the specific advantage of using them versus what your competitors might be offering?
So first of all, our brands our brands have different go-to-market strategies, right? So one brand, Want to Go, is a very tourist-facing brand. It serves mostly Western tourists in Southeast Asian markets. So a lot of Europeans, North America tourists that get to Asia really hear about Want to Go in a lot of blogs, a lot of social media posts, and so on. Um, and then we have different brands that are domestic facing brands. By the way, the market is made of domestic customers, which are domestic tourists, and international tourists. And domestic customers are not people that are commuting. They are people that are going on vacation or in their own country, or actually visiting their family or something like that. They go long distance, right? So for example, the carnival in Brazil that's happening next week is an example of domestic, a huge domestic tourism event. So we have brands that are focused on the domestic customers. We have brands for Latin American domestic customers. We have a specific brand for Brazilian domestic customers, and that these brands have kind of evolved to have a certain brand recognition in their respective geographies.
That's really so. For let's just run through them really quickly, because I actually want to make sure all our global listeners know what the consumer brands are and what markets they operate in. So just give us a quick overview of that.
Yeah, so Want to Go is mostly operating in Asia with international tourists. We have Bookaway.com that is mostly for international tourists in Latin America. Also operates in other regions though. Traveling.com is mostly European focused, Mediterranean, I guess, Europe. Then Plataforma 10, Plataforma DS is a Latin American brand, Argentina, Paraguay, Colombia, Peru, etc. And then the Omnibus is a Brazilian brand. And I think the conversation about multi-brand is a wider conversation of what it brings versus the execution hurdles that it has. And we kind of currently we're choosing the path of having different brands in different regions, because it allows us to have a different kind of product market fit in every region.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, what the global growth opportunity for you and the team is incredibly compelling. I'm sure obviously your investors are bullish as well, because there are so many untapped opportunities globally to connect that supply with an increasingly growing demand that is expected to double over the course of the next 10 to 20 years. If there's 400 million travelers now, there's going to be 800 million by 2050, and so it's going to be that much more important to make sure that people are distributed properly. All the factors at play, which is why investors are so bullish on travel, with the aging baby boomer population, the generational wealth transfer, younger generation much more focused on traveling than saving for retirement or buying a home. All the factors are in play for travel to continue, despite the setbacks, which you've been in the travel industry long enough to know that there are short-term setbacks by virtue of global events or geopolitical events. But travel is resilient; it always comes back. It comes back different. So having a business that is global and that has that diversity is incredibly important. So I want to talk about where you guys are headed. Having said all of that, and all of our listeners getting a better understanding of the background on your story and where you guys have gotten to. But let's talk about 2026 and beyond. Tell us a little bit about where you guys are headed, whether it be new markets, new brands, expanding to more partnerships. What's on your roadmap for 2026, and what ultimately I want to know what your success looks like in 2030. But let's talk about 2026 first. So what is on your roadmap for this year?
Yeah, first of all, we're going into several new geographies. Um, we're localizing our systems in certain geographies to new audiences. For example, in Asia, one of the audiences that we're not serving too very well is the domestic audience. So we also have a lot of opportunities there because people like in Thailand, in Vietnam, and so on are traveling domestically, and that's a huge part of the market which we are kind of want to focus on a little bit more. Um, we have a B2B new business unit, which is rather new, and it took us a while to really technically merge all of the different APIs or and the operators that we connected to, and now we are able to offer one kind of single source that you can get all of ground and sea transportation and add it to your platform. So that's one growth lever that we firmly believe in the next couple of years. And in general, we just feel that we have so much to do, um, even in the basic stuff. And a lot of times, I think that still, even though we've taken huge leaps in how the industry has evolved and how easy it is to book transportation today versus 10 years ago, still the experience in ground and sea transportation is not amazing, right? In a lot of places, and the distance between how easy and seamless it is to book a hotel in Booking today, and how easy and seamless it is to book a ferry or a bus, um, is where we need to go to, is the distance that we need to do to walk, and we're getting there. And 2030, I'm sure that booking a bus or a ferry anywhere in the world and getting to any destination is going to be a non-issue, to the point that you wouldn't even consider, is it worth it or not. If you want to get to some point, you're just going to book it and know that you'll be able to get there easily and enjoy the experience while doing that.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about that. Like 2030 is not that far away. I mean, it is only 4 years away, so it's not even a 5-year plan anymore. But 2030 is a milestone that many companies are looking at for their sustainability efforts or their growth targets, and like it's kind of the next big milestone as we move into the next decade. Where do you want this business to be, or where do you think you guys will be entering 2030 in terms of I know obviously you rebranded successfully to Travelier, and I mean that's just part of the journey you've been on, and you've acquired competitors. You continue to build new brands within the business. When you talk to the team and your investors, what are sort of the long-term plans of how you see Travelier in 2030?
So in the end, I think that ground sea transportation is one of the several verticals that you have in travel. And in every vertical, you see clear, I guess, winners or kind of companies that took most of the market, whether it's Booking and Expedia in hotels or Get Your Guide, Viator in experiences. And we want to be the company that really takes ground and sea transportation and lead that vertical, and we are on the way to get there. And we understand that as the industry matures, and the industry went through a process, started with flights, and then hotels went online, and experiences and chosen experiences is kind of the recent decade online advance. Ground and sea transportation is really literally the last undigitized segment. And if everybody's thinking about the connected trip and want to get there, the glue to the connected trip is transportation. So you can't really connect the trip without getting from place to place. And so we know the industry is going together. We know that the customers are there already. We know that whatever inventory that we put online, that we put on the shelf, there's demand for it, and people are looking to buy online. In some markets, we're as low as, like, the online penetration is as low as 5%. In other markets, it's higher, but still there's huge blue oceans in various regions of the world that we want to get into.
For sure. No, it's a very exciting and bright future, and I'm incredibly encouraged from getting to know you and seeing the trajectory of the business and getting to know a bit more about the team. And obviously our conversation today has only further validated that. And I guess that's where, when people are listening to this, I'm sure there's many different angles that people can plan to connect with you or reach out to you. What would sort of be, from your vantage point, Noam, the primary ways to connect and collaborate with you guys for, like, whether it be, clearly there might be some investors that are interested in the next stage of your journey, but I'm actually thinking more about, partners and suppliers. I'm thinking about distribution platform.
So yeah, we're pretty easily kind of accessible. You can email me directly, noam@travelier.com. It's simple. You can shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Just make sure you explain the context. I get a lot of messages that are mostly sales, right? But we're happy to talk to anyone that has, like, a relevant context.
Yeah, and then you mentioned about getting older and having kids. Tell us where you're headed this year for your travels. What's on the horizon for you, and when you're out there, are you testing some of this technology and also exploring some of these new destinations?
I do. Yeah. We like to eat our own dog food, I guess. So I make sure to try different services when I'm my last trip was Thailand. Actually, I don't know where is my next vacation. So my next flight is ITB, right? But we're probably going to somewhere in Europe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think the reality for most of us now is that we're trying to find a way to combine business and leisure travel, right? That's, like, I'm sure you're doing the exact same thing where you're trying to figure out, wait, I'm going here, and, like, can my wife come or can the kids? And it's like,
Look, I'm pretty well positioned, right? So we have offices in great destinations, right? So if you're getting to the Brazil office, Sao Paulo, I mean, the big temptation to stay around and go to one of the beaches, right? Thailand, definitely. So most of the time I need to kind of hold back on the temptation to actually stay in the remote office.
for sure. Now, let's leave everyone with one last takeaway from you, Noam, given, like, we've covered so much, but, like, if there was one big misconception about ground and sea travel that you continually hear for people that are trying to understand who you are and what you guys do, what's one thing that, if you could change, what would that be? And we'll leave that as a takeaway for all of our listeners.
I think the one thing that I would like to kind of leave you with is that ground sea transportation is a huge and super important part of the travel industry, and it's currently being overlooked. And it's something that everybody needs. Everybody's going to use it at some point of their travels, and everybody's going to have a hard time booking it unless the industry goes online. So it's a huge opportunity, and it's really kind of the last opportunity to digitize the industry in travel today.
Yeah. Well, and I find that incredibly exciting, and I'm keen to know when you guys are doing your next round. But you and I will see each other many times throughout the year, and I look forward to having you back on Travel Trends to do another spotlight in the future to follow your success and growth trajectory, whether it's this year or sometime next year. But I've really enjoyed this spotlight episode. Obviously, it's great getting to know you, but also fantastic to hear your story. So all the best to you and the team for a terrific 2026. And I look forward to seeing you soon and keeping in touch. Thank you again.
Thanks. Great to be here, and thanks for the interview.
Thanks so much for joining us on this special spotlight episode of Travel Trends. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Noam Toister, the CEO and co-founder of Travelier, a really fascinating company that's continuing to grow significantly. And you can hear why as we had this conversation on all the brands that they have under their umbrella, both the companies they acquired during the pandemic and how they're expanding across the globe with entering new markets with both marketplace platforms and solutions for suppliers. So definitely check out Travelier.com if you want to find ways to partner with Noam and the team. And don't forget that we do post clips and highlights from these conversations on all our social channels, which you can find on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And if you enjoyed this Spotlight episode, definitely make sure you're subscribed on the streaming platform of your choice, Apple, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. And then we post all the spotlights on our website at traveltrendspodcast.com/spotlights. Thanks again for joining us and being part of this global community. We really appreciate it. Until next time, safe travels.